So Manchester City have been charged by the Premier League with over 100 charges relating to their finances. If found guilty, it could have catastrophic consequences on firstly Man City and secondly potentially English football as a whole. Today I'm going to explain firstly the charges that Man City have got against them and secondly showcase all possible outcomes ranging from the best to the worst outcomes for the club. But before we get into it, make sure you do like and subscribe to the channel if you're new and tell me down below what punishment you think Man City will get, if any, to be honest. So firstly, what are the charges that are against Manchester City? Well, following a 4-year investigation, the Premier League has officially charged them with over 100 charges, which span over a 9-year period. All of these charges are related to breach of financial rules, and the years that they've been charged from starting 2009 to 2010 and go all the way through to the 2017-18 season. Now, I must say, this isn't the first time Man City have been charged by a governing body before. In 2020, UEFA handed them a 2-year European football ban for quote-unquote serious breaches of club licensing and financial fair play regulations. Now, fortunately for City, this ban was eventually overturned after they took it to the Court of Arbitration for Sports, and they favoured Man City's side and Man City got off scot-free. Now, there's a big difference between this UEFA charge and this Premier League charge. As I just told you, Man City appealed the UEFA charge and got it overturned. With the Premier League charge, if they are found guilty, they cannot appeal, and they cannot go back to the Court of Arbitration for Sports. So if Man City are found guilty from these charges, they are guilty and they will be punished. Now, I'm not going to go into the fact whether City have cheated or whatever. That's not for me to decide. To be honest, it's not for you to decide. It's for the investigations and the courts to decide. I'm simply here to show you the different outcomes and all the possibilities that could potentially happen, because this could have serious impacts on the Premier League title holders. Because there is over 100 different charges, they will be handled separately. So for example, City could be found guilty on about 50 charges and not guilty on the other 50, and this will obviously decide how severe the punishment is. Now, let's start with the best outcome for Manchester City is they are found not guilty on every single charge. They carry on spending and operating as usual. They probably continue to dominate the Premier League, and to be honest, I think that's a pretty obvious one. The next outcome could be a fine. Now, depending on how serious the financial irregularities are, the fine could be in the tens of millions or it could be a couple thousand. At the end of the day, it will depend on the intent, the numbers, and how many charges they are found guilty on. So if the investigation found that City deliberately inflated their numbers, then there's no doubt that the fine will be absolutely huge. Definitely well into the millions, and they'll probably have some harsher consequences, which we'll get into a bit later. Also, the higher the numbers involved, the higher the fines are. I think that's pretty obvious to say. And if they were found guilty on every single charge, then obviously the fine's going to be a lot higher than if they were found guilty on half of the charges. But let's be honest, a fine wouldn't really hurt Manchester City. City are one of the richest clubs in the world, so money, to be honest, isn't really a problem for them. The only way I can see it really affecting City if the fine was into the 50, 60, 70 millions. But to be honest, I think that's completely unrealistic. Even a fine of £10 million isn't really going to do that much. They spend that on academy prospects. At the end of the day, they're one of the richest clubs in the world. They've owned the City group, which is by far the biggest and richest footballing group. A fine's not really going to do anything. The next possible outcome could be a transfer embargo. Now, if you don't know what a transfer embargo, it basically means the club is not allowed to buy any players. And we saw it a couple years ago with Chelsea when they had Frank Lampard as a manager. I think that's probably the last time we've seen a team have a proper embargo. And a transfer embargo is usually a season or two at most. It's never really 3 or 4 seasons. And to be honest, lots of the time it's 1 season, even 1 transfer window. Again, this really depends on the severity of the charges, but to be honest, I don't really see a transfer embargo doing that much damage to City. City already have a world-class team and a world-class academy, which, to be honest, their academy is probably better than some Premier League clubs. A transfer embargo will mean that just no players join Manchester City, and to be honest, probably no one will leave Manchester City unless they force their way out. They'll still probably be competing in Europe and competing in the Premier League and probably winning a title even while they've got an embargo. With youngsters like Rico Lewis and Cole Palmer being able to step up as well, they will 100% be perfectly fine. And it actually might help some of these younger players develop. So now we're starting to get to the worst punishments, and we've got a points deduction next. Now again, this can vary on the severity of the charges. We have seen recently a lot of clubs getting suspended points deductions, and City could possibly get a suspended points deduction, which basically means if they get caught out trying to fiddle the books again, then they'll have an automatic deduction added on straight away. We've seen points deductions in the past, with famously Juve getting a -99 deduction in 2006, and more recently my club Derby County got -21 points. Now if we look at Derby, I know it's my club and whatever, but it is the closest to probably City's situation right now. I know it's on a completely different scale, but we got done for financial fair play, and it seems to be the charges are revolving around financial fair play, so I'd say it's probably the closest closest comparison. And I will just state here, I have a complete bias because I think what the EFL did to Derby was absolute stupid. But anyway, we got a 9-point deduction for breaking financial fair play rules. And if City have found similar of breaking financial fair play rules, then we can expect probably a 9-point deduction again. But let's be completely honest, unless the points deduction is huge, a huge number, it's not going to affect City at all. For example, if it's 9 points, let's be honest, they're probably still going to be competing nearish to the top of the table, probably for the top 4 spot. If they get a points deduction from day one, it basically means they'll just be trying to catch up every other Premier League team. And if it's 9 points, to be honest, 5 games in, they'll probably be out of the relegation zone. If they were to have a -9 right now, they would be in 5th spot, 3 points behind Tottenham Hotspur in 4th with a game in hand. So basically, it'd be operation as usual, just they're not going to win the title that year. And now for probably the worst thing that Manchester City can get from this outcome, and that's exclusion from the Premier League. Now, I just want to make this totally clear. I do not believe this will happen. And to be honest, I see no possible way of this happening to a club like Manchester City. City is such a big club in world football right now, and they bring in so much revenue for the Premier League that I just don't see it happening. And if it were to happen, more than likely Man City would get let into the Championship and just go straight back up. I can see the EFL probably challenging that, and they might have to start all the way at the bottom. Now, to be honest, this is unfair on every other team because Man City will just rise through the leagues and batter every single team they play. Whether that's in the Championship or even the National League, they will come first every time and probably win every game. I mean, if City were excluded from the Premier League, that is a massive statement the Premier League has set out there, as more than likely Pep Guardiola would definitely leave and most of the playing staff would leave. But as I said at the start, I just don't see this happening at all. Just want to point out that you can mix and match these, by the way. So if they are found guilty, potentially they might get a fine and a transfer embargo, or they might get an embargo and a points deduction. You can mix and match these different outcomes. But let's be honest, right? Man City will be more than perfectly fine. Unless something completely drastic happens, they'll probably be challenging in Europe and for the Premier League title every season, depending on whatever happens. And if they do get a deduction, it'll be top 4. They will still probably have Pep Guardiola and most of their team, and their players will still be earning loads and loads of money. What I can see personally, if they're found guilty, there'll be a slap on the wrist, maybe a little fine, maybe a season's embargo. I just want to say that don't get too carried away thinking they'll disappear, because more than likely everything will just carry on as normal. What punishment do you think Man City should get if they are found guilty? Make sure you like and subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I hope you have an amazing rest of the day.